There's a tree that sends its roots 175 feet underground to find water. It survives where nothing else survives. Temperatures above 120 degrees. Soil so barren that crops die in weeks, droughts that last years. This tree does not die. It waits. It reaches deeper. It finds water no irrigation system can touch and no well driller would think to tap. Its pods contain up to 35% sugar and 17% protein. Ground into flour, they produce a meal richer in calcium than milk, richer in potassium than bananas, and so low on the glycemic index that it does not spike blood sugar at all. For more than 10,000 years, this tree was the foundation of survival in the American desert. The Apache ground it into bread. The Comanche brewed it into a drink that sustained war parties across hundreds of miles of open wasteland. The Pima, the Tohono O'odham, the Mojave, dozens of nations, different languages. One tree, then cattle ranchers arrived. They overgrazed the grasslands, stripped the soil, and when the tree spread into the bare ground they had created, they called it a weed. The United States government responded by spending decades and tens of millions of dollars trying to poison it, bulldoze it, and burn it off the face of the continent. They failed. This is mesquite, the tree the desert built, the tree that fed civilizations, the tree that the cattle industry tried to erase because it grew where they wanted grass. And here is the part that should make you stop and think. They are still trying to kill it. The archive opens in the Sonoran Desert approximately 8,000 BCE. Long before any Europeans set foot on this continent, a woman kneels beneath a twisted tree in the dry bed of a seasonal wash. Its branches are armed with thorns. Its leaves are small, feathered, built to conserve every molecule of water. Hanging from every limb are long, pale pods, shaped like flattened beans. She gathers them by the armful. She carries them back to a stone matut and grinds them into a fine powder. The powder is sweet, richer than any grain she has ever tasted. She mixes it with water and forms it into cakes that dry hard in the sun. These cakes will last months without spoiling. They are complete nutrition: protein, fiber, calcium, iron, magnesium, potassium, zinc. She does not need to plant this tree. She does not need to irrigate it. She does not need to fertilize it. It grows on its own in the worst soil on earth, and it produces food every year without asking for anything in return. She has just harvested mesquite. The National Park Service documented that mesquite was one of the most significant dietary staples for indigenous communities of the Sonoran, Chihuahuan, and Mojave Deserts. Archaeology Southwest recorded that mesquite pods were the single most important food resource for desert peoples, consumed in greater quantities than any cultivated crop. This was not a supplement, it was the center of the diet. The Apache called mesquite a gift from the earth. They ate the pods fresh, dried them for storage, and ground them into flour for bread and porridge. The Comanche fermented the pods into a mildly alcoholic drink. The Pima brewed a syrup so sweet and thick it could be stored for years. The Tohono O'odham held annual mesquite harvests that brought entire communities together in ceremonies that had been practiced for thousands of years. The Mojave mixed mesquite flour with water to create a porridge they fed to infants and the elderly. As the Texas Almanac recorded, southwestern Indians used all parts of the tree: beans, bean pods, leaves, roots, trunk, limbs, bark, and gum. Every piece served a purpose. The wood built houses and ramadas. The thorns served as needles and awls. The bark was woven into baskets and sandals. The gum was used as a glue, a dye, and a medicine for sore throats and open wounds. The sap was applied directly to cuts and scrapes as a natural disinfectant. One tree provided food, shelter, tools, weapons, and medicine. It did so for free. It did so forever. And it did so in a landscape so hostile that virtually nothing else could survive. Now here is what makes mesquite unlike almost anything else on this planet. It is a legume, like beans, like peas, like clover. Its roots host colonies of rhizobium bacteria that pull nitrogen directly from the atmosphere and fix it into the soil. In the poorest, most depleted ground on the continent, mesquite does not just survive. It rebuilds. It fertilizes the earth around it without a single gram of synthetic input. Researchers at Texas A&M documented that the capacity of mesquite to fix nitrogen and enrich soil makes it a keystone species for desert ecosystems. Where mesquite grows, other plants follow. The soil beneath the mesquite canopy contains measurably higher levels of nitrogen, organic matter, and microbial activity than the soil just meters away in open ground. This tree does not compete with the desert. It heals it, and its root system is beyond anything engineers have designed. Mesquite roots have been documented at 175 feet below the surface. A KNPR report on Mojave Desert mesquites recorded root systems extending up to 200 feet underground. Those roots tap aquifers that no surface crop could ever reach. They find water in places where well drillers give up. In Bahrain, in the Persian Gulf, a single mesquite tree has survived alone in open desert for over 400 years. No visible water source, no other vegetation. Scientists believe its roots reach an underground aquifer far beneath the sand. They call it the Tree of Life. Tourists visit it from around the world. It is a mesquite, and the wood itself is extraordinary. Mesquite has a Jonca hardness rating of 2,345 pounds force. That makes it the hardest native wood in North America. Harder than white oak at 1,360, harder than hard maple at 1,450, harder than hickory at 1,820, 82% harder than northern red oak. The Arizona highways documented that the average surface hardness of mesquite is 2,336 pounds, which is twice that of oak and maple and almost 6 times as hard as cottonwood. It is dense at 45 pounds per cubic foot. It is dimensionally stable. It does not warp. It does not crack. It makes furniture, flooring, fence posts, tool handles, and structural beams that last generations. Today, mesquite lumber sells for $19 to $22 per board foot, premium prices that rival the finest exotic hardwoods. And the tree that produces it grows for free in the desert without irrigation, without fertilizer, without any human intervention at all. Food, fuel, lumber, medicine, nitrogen fixation, soil restoration, all from a tree that thrives where nothing else can grow. This is exactly why the cattle industry declared war on it. The villain arrives in the 1860s. Cattle ranching explodes across the American West. Millions of longhorns spread across Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and beyond. The animals eat everything. They strip the native grasses down to bare soil. They trample the ground until it compacts into hardpan. And they eat mesquite pods by the thousands. The seeds pass through their digestive tracts intact, scarified by stomach acid, and deposited across the landscape in neat packages of ready-made fertilizer. Cattle became the most effective mesquite dispersal system in history. The tree did exactly what it was designed to do. It colonized bare, degraded soil. It moved into the empty spaces that overgrazing had created. It began fixing the nitrogen that the cattle had stripped from the ground, and the ranchers looked at what their own animals had caused and blamed the tree. By the early 1900s, mesquite had expanded from scattered groves along drainages and river bottoms into vast stands covering millions of acres of open rangeland, the same rangeland that cattle had destroyed. Researchers at Texas A&M documented the pattern clearly. Wildlife expanded clusters of mesquite slowly. Cattle expanded the mesquite range greatly and filled in the areas between existing mesquite. The cattle created the problem. The tree responded to the problem. And the industry that created the problem declared the response a weed. What followed was one of the longest and most expensive eradication campaigns in American agricultural history. The USDA, state agricultural agencies, and private ranchers launched a multi-decade assault on mesquite using every tool available. Bulldozers, root plows, chains dragged between tractors to rip trees from the ground, controlled burns, and above all, herbicides. Millions of acres were sprayed from aircraft with chemical cocktails designed to kill mesquite without killing grass. Clopyralid, triclopyr, picloram. Corteva Agriscience, one of the world's largest agricultural chemical companies, markets a product called Sendero specifically as the standard in mesquite control. In Texas alone, landowners spent $25 million over a single 10-year period to clear 300,000 hectares of mesquite. That is a fraction of the 22 million hectares of Texas land affected by mesquite. Extrapolate that spending across 6 decades of eradication efforts across multiple states, and the total investment in killing this tree reaches well into the tens of millions of dollars. Some estimates suggest the combined public and private expenditure on mesquite removal over the past 70 years exceeds $50 million. And here's the fact the herbicide companies will never print on their labels. It did not work. Mesquite cannot be eradicated. Cut it down and it resprouts from the root crown. Burn it, and it sends up new growth from lateral roots. Spray it with herbicide in dormant buds below the soil surface. Wait for the chemical to degrade, then emerge. Previous land management practices have proven that excessive application of herbicides, physical removal of mesquite trees, or human-induced brush fires, if not done at a specific time of year and at specific intervals, may actually increase mesquite density. The researchers at the University of Arkansas confirmed it. In many cases, the eradication attempts made the problem worse. They spent millions of dollars and decades of effort trying to kill a tree, and the tree grew back thicker than before. The cattle industry created the conditions for mesquite expansion by overgrazing native grasses and suppressing natural fire cycles. Then, it spent generations trying to destroy the organism that was healing the damage they caused, and it billed the taxpayer for the effort. Now here is what the nutritional science confirmed when someone finally looked at the pods instead of the herbicide budget. Mesquite flour contains 10 to 17% protein with all essential amino acids. The highest concentrations are valine, leucine, and lysine, the amino acids most critical for muscle repair and immune function. It contains 25 to 35% dietary fiber. It is rich in calcium, magnesium, iron, potassium, and zinc. A 2020 study published in the journal Nutrients characterized the nutritional and bioactive properties of mesquite flour and confirmed its significant nutritional profile. A 2021 study published in Legume Science found that a diet based on mesquite seed prevented metabolic dysfunction in mice, producing lower levels of lipids and glucose in blood. The glycemic index of mesquite flour is approximately 25. Table sugar is 68. White bread is 75. Mesquite is sweet without spiking insulin. It is one of the very few natural sweeteners on Earth that actively helps regulate blood sugar rather than destabilizing it. The natural sweetness in the pods comes from fructose, which does not require insulin to metabolize. For the 37 million Americans living with diabetes and the 96 million with prediabetes, a low glycemic, high fiber, high protein flour that grows for free in the desert should be headline news. It is not. The American agricultural system is built on corn and wheat. Both require industrial irrigation, synthetic fertilizer, and annual replanting. Both generate revenue for seed companies, chemical manufacturers, and equipment dealers every single season. Mesquite requires none of that. It grows on its own. It fixes its own nitrogen. It harvests its own water from 100 to 75 feet underground. It produces food indefinitely without purchase, without input, without dependency. That model generates no revenue for anyone except the person standing under the tree. One honest note before the close. Mesquite pods that have fallen to the ground and become wet can develop aflatoxin-producing molds. Pods should be harvested directly from the tree or collected from dry ground before monsoon rains. The traditional indigenous practice was to harvest pods in early summer when they were dry and pale, never after they had been rained on. Mesquite flour should be milled from clean, dry pods and stored in airtight containers. Some mesquite species have thorns that can cause injury. And while mesquite flour is nutritious, it does contain natural sugars and should be consumed as part of a balanced diet, not as a sole food source. These are the same common sense precautions that apply to any wild harvested food. The indigenous peoples who relied on mesquite for 10,000 years understood these boundaries without needing a federal agency to explain them. Here is what you can do right now. If you live in the American Southwest, mesquite trees are almost certainly growing within driving distance. Honey mesquite, Prosopis glandulosa, is the most common species and produces abundant sweet pods. Velvet mesquite, Prosopis velutina, dominates Arizona. Both produce excellent flour. Harvest pods when they are dry, straw-colored, and snap cleanly when bent. If the pod bends without breaking, it is not ready. Mill the dried pods in a grain mill or heavy-duty blender. Sift the flour to remove the hard seed fragments. What remains is a fine, sweet, gluten-free powder that can be used in pancakes, bread, muffins, tortillas, smoothies, and as a natural sweetener in coffee or tea. It tastes like caramel with a hint of chocolate. Mesquite flour is also available commercially from specialty suppliers for approximately $10 to $15 per pound. If you have land in USDA hardiness zones 7 through 11, you can plant mesquite. It requires no irrigation once established. It improves soil fertility through nitrogen fixation. It provides shade, windbreak, firewood, lumber, and food. It produces pods within 5 out of 7 years and continues producing for decades. One tree, planted once, feeding a family indefinitely. The cattle industry did not hate mesquite because it was worthless. They hated it because it was competition. A tree that feeds people and animals for free, that grows without input on land no other crop can use, that rebuilds depleted soil and produces the hardest lumber on the continent, threatens every industry built on selling what mesquite provides for nothing. Corn requires $350 per acre in fertilizer. Mesquite fertilizes itself. Wheat requires irrigation that drains aquifers. Mesquite taps water no irrigation system can reach. Treated lumber rots in 15 years. Mesquite lasts generations. The American food system spends billions producing what a desert tree provides for free. The eradication campaigns were never about ecology. They were about economics. A tree that cannot be owned, that cannot be patented, that cannot be sold as a recurring annual input is not a resource in a system designed around dependency. It is a threat, and the tens of millions spent trying to destroy it are not evidence that mesquite is a problem. They are evidence that mesquite is a solution the system cannot afford to acknowledge. Somewhere in the desert right now, a mesquite tree is reaching its roots deeper into the earth. It is pulling water from an aquifer 150 feet below the surface. It is fixing nitrogen into soil so degraded that nothing else will grow. It is producing pods so nutritious that an ancient civilization built its survival around them. It has been doing this for 10,000 years. It survived every drought. It survived every fire. It survived every bulldozer, every chain, every herbicide, sprayed from every aircraft the government could afford. It survived because the desert built it to survive. And no amount of money will change that. The pods are hanging right now, dry, sweet, waiting for someone to remember what every indigenous nation in the American Southwest never forgot. The desert is not empty. It has been feeding people since before agriculture existed. The tree is still there. The knowledge is still there. The only thing missing is the willingness to look. If this vault opens something for you, subscribe and hit the bell. Every like and every share preserves what they tried to erase. The next vault opens soon.